I Am Legend was released in 2007, directed by Francis Lawrence and stars Will Smith. This is a film that seems to have entered popular culture. It's still, 13 years after it was released. It was a box office success, and it does seem to still be remembered, unlike a lot of films at the time, particularly films with with Will Smith. Um, it's a film that when I first watched it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can remember thinking, I would have seen it as a sort of early teenager. I remember thinking it was really a really sort of cool, suspense-driven film. Will Smith's performance was really good. It was really engaging, and I didn't really understand a lot of the criticism for it. Watching it 13 years after it was released, of course, we now see that parts of the film have been sort of prophetic for the world that we today live in. But watching it today, I think the criticisms that some people have had for the film, I do notice them a bit more than I did 12, 13 years ago. I think it is a flawed film. There's a good film in there, I think, trying to get out, but it's very much encumbered by a lot of the choices that have been made by the filmmakers as they were making it. Even as the film went into post production, I think a lot of choices were made by the filmmakers that did kind of bring the film down, in my view. Um, so the film is based, or it's an adaptation rather, of the 1954 novel I Am Legend, which is very different to this film, but it is a story that has been adapted several times before, with Vincent Price, with Charlton Heston. So this is the newest sort of iteration of it. I'm sure it'll be remade again. Um, and it started with sort of good foundations. It had been discussed as a project in Hollywood for 10, 15 years, starting in the 90s. I think sort of Ridley Scott was attached to it at one point. That would have been an interesting film to see. Will Smith was cast in the lead. He plays a scientist or an immunologist who is immune to the virus, which has killed like 99% of the human population, and a tiny percentage that's left have evolved into these like sort of vampiric um, creatures almost that can only come out at night and that feed on humans, feed on meat, and they've lost, well, ostensibly they've lost all semblance of humanity. So it's a very interesting concept, and I think I'll discuss the things which work best in the film first. And one of those things is definitely the special effects with regards to creating a post-apocalyptic world. So the early scenes in particular, where Will Smith's going through New York and it's completely abandoned, it's overgrown. Buildings and things are starting to collapse. That stuff is fantastic, and I think looking at CGI as a tool for filmmakers, I really do believe that one of the best uses of CGI is actually making things disappear. Because it's the thing in films you don't really notice. To be honest, it's not a creation; it's rather taking things away. And I think this film is a very effective use of it. The New York that they've created through CGI is breathtaking, and it still holds up. However, the special effects are a root of one of the film's, in my view, one of the film's main problems, which I'll get into when I discuss things that didn't really work for me. Will Smith's performance, I think, is fine. Um, he's one of these actors, isn't he? He's not good in everything that he's in, but he is sort of consistently likable. Um, people people do seem to like him. He's one of these actors, maybe like The Rock, or someone who is just in a lot of films that are bad, but people do just he is still a name that attracts an audience. So I Am Legend. Will Smith's performance in this I thought was fine. He obviously, apparently, he did put a lot of effort into it, and it does show. it's a difficult performance to do. When he's most of the film he's acting just alongside a dog. And I guess that's one of the other plaudits the film deserves. It's probably one of the best performances by a dog in a film. The German Shepherd, they do a lot of good with that. I mean, you've got that old Hollywood mantra of never work with children or animals, but it worked fine in this film. I thought that was the relationship between Will Smith and his dog was one of the standouts of the film. And yeah, the atmosphere that they create with this abandoned New York, the early scenes of the film, in my view, the first act and the second act are strong. They're quite sort of emotionally driven. They're suspenseful. Before you see the creatures, it's all very suspenseful. Or I suppose you see them in glimpses early on, until you see them fully. It's suspenseful, and there are a few really good scenes. I can remember watching from the first time and being quite on the edge of my seat. So that stuff's good. I like the stuff with the mannequins. I think that's it reminds me a bit of Castaway, with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks, he's alone for most of the film, but he talks to like the football. There's like a handprint on it. Will Smith talks to his dog, and he talks to the mannequins, and that's how you get some of the character development. And the scenes in the past, where the virus was breaking out, really good. Some of the most expensive scenes ever filmed, from what I understand. They had to close off the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. I mean, it's impressive to see. It's impressive from a sort of filmmaking point of view, just seeing them being able to do this. So the film works on a lot of levels. I think it's certainly more good than bad. But the issues for me rise most strongly in the third act of the film, which I'll put a spoiler label over this video. But as soon as the women and her son show up towards the end of the film, in fact earlier than that possibly, but from when the dog dies, after that the film just falls apart for me. It loses all of the sort of tension and suspense that had been built. I think a lot of the strength of the film came from Will Smith just acting on his own. It lost the emotional connection, and also I mentioned earlier the special effects are a bit hit and miss. They miss the mark greatly with the creatures. The creatures are suspenseful until you see them, and they're just so cartoonish. It's like CGI that's kind of unfinished, especially because they're like running around and throwing themselves about. It reminded me of the famous like YouTube video of the guy. I think it's titled like "Man Walks Down the Street" or "Man Walks to the Store" or something, and it's that kind of CGI. It just looks terrible, even for 2007 standards. And it's a shame because I looked it up on YouTube. There were screen tests done where they had actors in like makeup and prosthetics, and it looks pretty creepy. Actually, it looks pretty effective, and I wish they'd gone for that because I'm 100% sure it would have looked better than what ended up on screen, and it deflated a lot of the tension for me. And similarly, the CGI, they have like I guess the animals from the zoo have escaped, and there's like lions and deer and all this sort of stuff going about in New York. That does not hold up. That looks really sort of cartoonish to me. And I think the film would have benefited from more of a narrative thrust. I mean, they tease like he's developing a vaccine to this illness, and he's working that through the film. But there's not really any build up or plot to that. He tries it once earlier in the film. The vaccine doesn't work, and then he just tries something different later, and then at the very end of the film, it does work on the women. And it didn't. I think the film would have benefited from more narrative, and even comparing it to the 70s version. In the 70s version, Charlton Heston's like going from A to B, and it feels like the film's more sort of pacier and more's going on. But this film, of course, benefits from being more emotionally driven. It is more in common, I think, with a film like Castaway or something than it does with the Omega Man in the 70s. And I guess also any discussion of I Am Legend has to include a mention of the alternative ending, which is You can see it on the DVD. I think it's also easily available on YouTube. The original ending for this film was fantastic. It was a very sort of dark, twisted, Twilight Zone-esque ending, where it really turned the stakes of the film and it turned it on its head. And I would encourage you to seek it out. Actually, I'm not going to describe what happens. I just think the alternative ending is far better. And I think if they'd included that, then it would have made me give the film a higher rating. But obviously, you've got to judge You've got to judge the film based on the finished product. You can't, you can't look at what it might have been. But yeah, it's a real shame they didn't go with that alternative ending. It would have been far better. But they went with an ending that was more sort of Hollywood. And yeah, it's one of those films. The production kind of bogged it down, I guess, and it seemed to be the film. I was looking at sort of Will Smith's filmography. This seemed to be the film that heralded the sort of decline and end of his film career. I mean, after this, he did Hancock, that classic, and then he did Men in Black 3, and then he waited. They didn't do anything for years, and then he did the Suicide Squad film, and then then Bad Boys, which as of this review is the highest grossing film of 2020, which is quite sad. But yeah, this film kind of ended his blockbuster career. He didn't really have the same draw after this film, which is curious because I do think this is one of his better performances. But I think just the critical backlash to it, and also just yeah, some of the reputation that the film gained. I think that did kind of kill his career, which is a shame because this film overall, I mean, it's a flawed film. It's a frustrating film, but there is a lot of good in it. There's a lot that I do admire. And yeah, I think as a rating, as I said, more good than bad. It's leaning good, certainly. And even though my impression of it has kind of deteriorated since I first watched it, I'm still going to give it 57 out of 100. It's a fine film. It's an entertaining enough film, moderately suspenseful. Will Smith's trying very hard. It just, for me, it just disintegrates when it gets to that third act. There's such a feeling of what could have been with the movie that's really hard to shake off. And ultimately, I feel like it's a film it's withstood the test of time, but it remains a deeply flawed movie.